April 8, 1943, 27,000 feet above conscious France. The oxygen mask couldn't hide Oberleutnant Ralph Hermiken's smirk as he looked down through the canopy of his Focke-Wulf 190. Below him, a formation of bulky new American fighters struggled for altitude through the cold, thin air. "They've sent us flying milk bottles," he joked to his wingman, watching the massive Republic P-47 Thunderbolts climb heavily towards the German formation. To Luftwaffe pilots used to sleek Messerschmitts and nimble Spitfires, the American aircraft looked absurd. Oversized propellers, thick wings, and a body that seemed too heavy to fight. What Hermiken didn't realize was that he was seeing the beginning of a new era in aerial warfare. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt would soon prove to be one of the most powerful and durable fighters ever built. Each Thunderbolt carried 8 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, over 3,000 rounds of ammunition, and an engine powerful enough to push the 7-ton aircraft past 400 miles per hour. What seemed slow and clumsy at first would become a weapon of destruction that the Luftwaffe would learn to fear. That morning over France, the Germans laughed. Within a year, they would not. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was born from urgency. In June 1940, as German forces swept across Europe, the United States realized it needed a fighter that could challenge the Luftwaffe at high altitude. The task fell to a Georgian-born engineer named Alexander Kartveli, chief designer at Republic Aviation. Kartveli didn't just build another fighter, he created a machine unlike anything before it. Huge, complex, and incredibly powerful. "It will be a dinosaur," he admitted to his team. "But it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The prototype, XP-47B, first flew in May 1941. It was enormous, weighing nearly 10,000 pounds empty, 60% heavier than the aircraft it replaced. Its massive turbo-supercharger system, routed through the rear fuselage, gave it a bloated look that shocked test pilots. Many doubted it could even leave the ground. But once in the air, it changed opinions instantly. The 2,000 horsepower Pratt and Whitney R2800 double wasp engine gave it unmatched performance at high altitude. While most fighters lost power above 20,000 feet, the P-47 maintained full strength at 27,000, a revolutionary feat at the time. It was fast, rugged, and could dive like a meteor. Yet, mastering it was dangerous. The aircraft's power came with severe torque on takeoff, and at high speeds, shock waves caused control surfaces to lock. Pilots who pushed it too hard sometimes never returned. Still, those who survived training discovered its true nature. A fighter built not for elegance, but for dominance. By late 1942, the first American squadrons began training with the new Thunderbolt, and they quickly learned how unforgiving it was. Major Hubert "Hub" Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, described it as a monster with wings. His unit lost dozens of aircraft before ever facing the enemy. The P-47 killed more pilots in training than in its first months of combat. It ground-looped during landings, torque-rolled during takeoff, and dove so steeply that pilots discovered a terrifying new problem: compressibility. As the Thunderbolt approached the speed of sound in a dive, shock waves formed on the wings, freezing the controls. Many pilots couldn't pull out in time. Still, Zemke and his men refused to give up. They studied every quirk, every vibration, every control response until they understood what the aircraft demanded. The solution to compressibility came through dive recovery flaps, an innovation that let pilots regain control at high speed. The P-47 was never meant to turn tightly or climb quickly. It was designed for power, speed, and survivability. Once pilots accepted that, everything changed. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, an Oklahoma farm boy who would become one of America's top aces, said, "It was like strapping yourself to a locomotive. You didn't fly it, you aimed it." The Thunderbolt became a weapon of confidence. It could absorb punishment that would destroy other fighters. Its thick armor, radial engine, and massive frame turned it into a flying fortress. The pilots who once cursed it were beginning to see its true potential. April 1943, the Thunderbolt entered combat over occupied France. For many American pilots, it was their first time facing the Luftwaffe. Their opponents were veterans, men who had fought in Poland, France, Britain, and Russia. The Americans were new, inexperienced, and flying an aircraft still seen as strange and heavy. The first encounters were rough. The P-47s couldn't turn with the agile Focke-Wulfs or Messerschmitts, and they struggled to climb as quickly. German pilots mocked them over the radio, calling them flying milk bottles. But what the Luftwaffe didn't understand was that the Americans were learning fast. They realized that the Thunderbolt's strength was not in agility, but in its speed, its dive, and its firepower. Instead of turning battles, they used altitude and hit hard in lightning-fast attacks, a tactic called boom and zoom. Dive from above, fire, and climb back before the enemy could react. This new strategy turned the Thunderbolt into a deadly predator. Its 8 Browning machine guns could shred a German fighter in seconds, and its massive airframe could take hits that would destroy almost any other plane. German pilots soon discovered that even when they hit a P-47, it didn't go down easily. Some came home full of bullet holes, with engines leaking oil, yet still flying strong. The laughter in the Luftwaffe started to fade. They began to realize that the Americans' milk bottle might be tougher than anything they'd ever fought. Summer 1943. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was still earning its name. Many American pilots were beginning to trust it. But one man would prove to everyone just how indestructible this machine really was. His name was Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, a farm boy from Oklahoma. On June 26, 1943, Johnson and his squadron were escorting bombers over France when German fighters struck. In the chaos, Johnson's P-47 was hit, not once, but dozens of times. Cannon shells ripped through the fuselage, oil splattered across his canopy, and his control cables were shredded. He tried to bail out, but his canopy was jammed shut. He was trapped. Then, a German ace in a Focke-Wulf 190 saw him struggling and dove in to finish the job. He made pass after pass, firing directly into the crippled Thunderbolt. Bullets smashed into the armor. Tracer rounds tore through the wings. Yet the P-47 refused to die. For what felt like an eternity, the German emptied his guns, circled once, and finally gave a salute before flying away, convinced Johnson must already be dead. But the farm boy wasn't done. Despite leaking fuel, no radio, and a barely responsive plane, Johnson managed to nurse the battered P-47 back across the channel and land safely in England. When mechanics counted the holes, they found over 200 bullet impacts. Yet the engine still ran. The landing gear still worked. From that day on, the P-47 gained a new reputation, not just as a fighter, but as a flying fortress. The Luftwaffe had met a machine that could give as much punishment as it could take, and still come home. By late 1943, the Thunderbolt had changed the skies over Europe. No longer mocked, it had become the backbone of the US Army Air Forces. But its evolution was just beginning. Commanders realized that the P-47 wasn't only a high-altitude escort, it was also a perfect attack aircraft. With 8 50 caliber machine guns and the strength to carry bombs and rockets, it could deliver destruction that no other single-engine fighter could match. Soon, Thunderbolts were flying low over occupied Europe, hunting trains, convoys, and anything with a German cross on it. They strafed locomotives until boilers exploded, ripped through trucks with cannon fire, and bombed bridges with terrifying precision. The Germans called it the Juggernaut, but to American pilots, it became simply the Jug. Its thick armor and rugged engine made it nearly invincible during these low-level missions. Pilots often returned with flak holes the size of fists, yet the plane kept flying. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine could keep turning even with cylinders blown apart. The P-47's dominance grew through 1944. It escorted bombers deep into Germany, took on the Luftwaffe head-to-head, and pounded enemy infrastructure day after day. When the Allies invaded Normandy, Thunderbolts were overhead, blasting German armor columns and cutting off reinforcements. By the end of the war, the P-47 had flown over 746,000 sorties, more than any other US fighter in Europe, and destroyed thousands of aircraft and ground targets. From flying milk bottle to the hammer of the skies, the Thunderbolt had become the ultimate symbol of American air power. A plane that could fight, protect, and punish, all in one mission. By 1944, the skies over Europe had changed. The Luftwaffe that once ruled them was now bleeding to death. And leading that destruction was the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. With drop tanks extending its range, the P-47 could now escort American bombers deep into Germany, to Berlin, Leipzig, and Munich. At high altitude, the Thunderbolt's turbo-supercharged engine gave it an edge the Germans couldn't match. When B-17s and B-24s were attacked, the Jugs were there, diving from the sun, unleashing 8 streams of fire that tore enemy fighters apart. But it wasn't only about dogfights anymore. The Thunderbolt became the spearhead of Allied air power. In the months before D-Day, P-47 squadrons roamed across France and Belgium, blasting rail lines, fuel depots, and convoys. When June 6, 1944 arrived, Thunderbolts were among the first over Normandy, hammering German positions behind the beaches. Everywhere the Wehrmacht moved, the Jugs followed. Tanks, trains, half-tracks, nothing was safe. One pilot described it simply: "We didn't rule the air, we owned it." By early 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of what it had been. The P-47s still flew daily, escorting bombers, strafing columns, and protecting advancing Allied troops. Their ruggedness meant they could land on rough frontline strips and fly again within hours. For the men who flew it, the Thunderbolt wasn't just a plane, it was a partner. It could take punishment, give it back tenfold, and still bring them home. It wasn't the prettiest fighter, nor the most agile, but it was unstoppable, a brute force wrapped in aluminum and thunder. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had written one of the greatest stories in aviation history. It flew more combat missions than any other US fighter in Europe, destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft, and countless tanks, trains, and vehicles. But its legacy went beyond numbers. The P-47 proved that brute strength and engineering could win wars as surely as agility or elegance. It was the perfect symbol of American industry. Massive, reliable, and devastatingly effective. After the war, Thunderbolts served around the world. They flew with France, Brazil, Mexico, and even the new air forces of liberated Europe. Some were still flying combat missions well into the 1950s. Yet for the men who flew her, the memories were what lasted most. They remembered the deafening roar of the double Wasp engine, the feeling of power as the Jug surged forward, and the unshakable confidence that no matter what, she'd bring them home. Pilots who had once doubted her ended their tours calling her the best friend they ever had. In an age defined by courage, the P-47 stood for something timeless: resilience, power, and the will to keep fighting no matter the odds. From the laughter of German pilots over France to the thunder that broke the Luftwaffe's back, the Jug had earned her name. She was more than a machine. She was the sound of victory.